Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today.
G'day, how are you?
Good, sir. I'm wonderful. You good self?
Yeah, there we go. Sorry about
There
that.
he is. Handsome bugger. How you doing, my good man?
Very nice. Nice to meet you. Are you a bit better?
I am getting there, most definitely. I ran the furthest I've ran in probably about 7 or 8 months today. So my legs are much better. They're slowly getting there.
Well, last time I talked to you, I thought you were bleeding profusely or something.
Yeah, no, I was getting some blood in the hospital because post-surgery on my leg, I developed a clot. I developed a clot, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And
okay.
Yeah, it was certainly causing me some aggravations, that's for sure. I'd had a clot in my leg long before, thrombophlebitis style thing. And it's just a very, I don't know if you've ever had one, but horrible nag, ache, dull, ugh, just one of those shit.
Yeah, no, I haven't. I know people that have had to stop any contact with fighting stuff because it's too risky now if you've had one of those. Look, I bought this just for you.
Did you? Wow.
Yeah.
Gucci.
30 pounds.
30 pounds. Send me the invoice. If we ever make any money, I'll reimburse you.
We probably should have spent a bit more, to be honest. But if it works, I don't even know where I'm meant to hold it. Do you bring it close?
So I always try and have this roughly around a fist away from my face. So it's designed that all of this external stuff here, all the outside of it, doesn't actually collect any sound. So it's just there for show. It's designed similar to this one to forgive. If you're in a poor audio environment, it just captures what's coming straight at it. The downside to that is if you ever do go, hey Pete, I've had this really great. Then
I've heard you talk about microphones on your podcast before. I don't want to be boring, but I did invest in one.
It's the best thing to do. I always say it's that combination between having something good to say and saying it well. We both sit somewhere on those spectrums, depending on the subject matter, the passion.
Well, I can't guarantee either of those things are going to happen, but as long as you can hear me.
You've automatically got one of those global things going for you, which you've got a good accent. So that helps significantly.
Well, that's ironic because I've just come back from Paris where that was not the feedback.
Was it not?
No, they said you could try a little few vowels and maybe moving your lips.
Fuck them. Don't worry about it. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, we all know the working environment of a firefighter is filled with challenges. We face serious risks on the job, such as heat exhaustion, burns, physical and mental stress, and we frequently come into contact with high levels of toxic chemicals. Now, I have been wearing Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades on the front line, working in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services through their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceeds global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. Gore-Tex, going further together.
You have an accent, of course.
I have an accent from somewhere. Mine's a bit of a mongrel, to be honest. I tend to accidentally pick up little bits and bobs from all the different people that I speak to from around the world. I think it's a subconscious mirroring.
New Zealand had a prime minister that used to do that, and it was very embarrassing on an international stage.
I am very difficult to offend is one of the habits I've developed over the time of doing things like podcasting. Just try and avoid making it about yourself at all. It's all about the individual.
Do you get? I was just interested on the podcast world. It's a very crowded space, and you've got a very particular little niche there. So I hope it's going well. Do you get unsolicited feedback, or do you solicit feedback from your audience?
We do both, but we predominantly get unsolicited feedback because I'm terrible at soliciting it on a regular basis, and we get a lot of lovely messages. So we reach on average, we reached about 390 something thousand people every sort of 6 months, but that averages out as something like 10 to 20,000 a month, depending on fluctuations. But every now and again, and I say every now and again on a daily basis, we will get messages from people all over the world, random. I had one from South Africa today I could send you a screenshot of. That one was from a firefighter. Most are from firefighters, to be fair, but we get quite a few from paramedics. We get some school teachers. We just get some random members of the public quite a lot who just say, my dad or my cousin or my ex-husband or my wife is a member of the emergency services, and I didn't really know anything about it, and I never really get an opportunity to hear from anybody working in that sector. Nobody really does what you're doing. So yeah, long ago, I decided to stay close-ish to this niche because you're right, the podcasting world is incredibly busy. It got enormously busier during COVID, and you can try and please everybody and end up pleasing nobody. Do you know what I mean? If I just wanted to call it the Pete Wakefield podcast, there'd be a little bit of, who the fuck are you? Everyone thinks they're fucking interesting when they're really not as interested as they probably think they are. But if you can make it about a sector, which for me is the emergency services, and I've found those people fascinating. I've worked with them for nearly 20 years, and there's some lovely characters in the sector. I did initially worry it was too much of a small niche, but now as I get further into it, I'm like, it's actually huge. So
it's such a rich little vein of stories, engaging, really great things, lessons to learn. But out of all of that space, the blue light space, and the firemen are the top one, and maybe nurses as well, but nobody doesn't love a fireman.
Yes, you're right. I will challenge you and say firefighter. Just have that in your mind as we move forward. Someone will call you a sexist pig bastard.
I'll tell you what that's from. It's from Fireman Sam. And I did listen to your podcast about that, actually.
We probably brought it up in a few different chats.
Yeah, you had a big chat around it with one particular lady.
Yeah, I can't remember what her name was.
It is really annoying. But I think I work with a lot of interesting people myself.
You do?
But my daughter, the only thing she's only 5. As soon as I said I was talking to a firefighter, she was like, her eyes lit up. Dad, can you ask him, does he get nervous going to a fire? Does he drive the truck? How high does he go on a ladder?
And that's romantically what I love about it as well, because we speak to so many people and they forget almost why they joined the job, or they think it's not as interesting as it used to be. And I'm like, nobody really talks about it. The problem is when so many people get into the sector, they can get a little bit disenchanted through some of the challenges and some of the things we see and some of the things we have to do, that we forget how interesting it is to us and how interesting it can still be. It's not the most fascinating shit in the world. I'd love to speak to surgeons and police officers and doctors and people like yourself, people, coaches, and these things fascinate me. But no one's talking about what we do, i.e. as firefighters, certainly from a UK, European perspective. There's a load of American firefighting podcasts, but they tend to only talk to other Americans, and they tend to only talk about firefighting and branches and hoses, and I'm like, that's a bit boring as piss. Whereas I try and I'm secretly head over heels in love with the personal development sector. So what I try and do is connect with people like yourself and fly you in under the veil of emergency services. Whereas I'm like, this is really, for me, it's about personal development. The podcast it's about speaking to fascinating people, and everything that you do really has so much tremendous benefit.
Well, look, I feel the same way about my sector. I think my sector is full of not many interesting people I would talk to. However, I do love talking to, and I do get to speak to surgeons and all sorts of people, but it's ordinary people that tell you the most interesting stuff often. The good, and you are about self-development and getting better. So those people generally are always interested in finding out what works in other sectors. One of our best days was having a little breakfast, and we had our clients come in. We had guys from the army, we had guys from we had some, not guys, women, men, all sorts, from forensic crime scene stuff.
I'd love to speak to some of them.
This lady, she was voted Policewoman of the Year, I think. She did the Grenfell Tower, she did the Manchester bombings, she did
hook me up, brother.
The London Bridge. She's gone back to New Zealand, but I'm sure she would talk to you.
People have got stories to tell. They're fascinating stories. And they're not fascinating to them usually because they were there, but they forget how incredible what they've done. She was interested in what the army were doing, and then there was rugby coaches there, and there were business people there, and there was a director of British Swimming was there. So, and they're all got similar things that they're talking about, but just in different contexts. They're all really interested and curious. And so I know what you mean.
But I imagine this is a very popular podcast.
Well, I don't know. I feel like it is, but it's also like anything else in life. As I'm getting a little bit older, I realize that it's all about consistency. It's all about keep showing up, fumbling. I always call it learning out loud because I'm fumbling my way through it. I try each episode to try and get a better conversationalist. I have to temper my excitement, otherwise I can start interrupting people and start getting too excited. But I try and get better at it every day, and I know that journey will never end. But the numbers are predominantly out of your control. That's what I love most about it. You're speaking into the void. There's nothing you can really do about how many people. I mean, you could pay for promotion and all that sort of stuff, but we don't do any of that. Everything we've achieved it's just natural growth. We don't anything like that, and that's why I've been doing it for 2 years, and we're just starting to get massive traction now. Really, is because just got to keep showing up, show that you can be part of somebody's schedule. Because podcasts is something people listen to on a weekly basis. You know, they'll have their thing that they go to. Some have it on a daily basis. But if you can be consistent, show up every week, put in the effort, you know this far better than me. You know, it's the boring stuff, and just try and be 1% better each time. For me, that's what it's all about. Right. Shall we kick it off?
Sure.
How am I pronouncing your name?
Oh, it's Bede. Yeah, that's quite funny. I was wondering whether to correct you or not, because it would have been quite a good joke for my friends. Yeah, Bede. It's an English name.
Is it now?
Yeah, Bede from Jarrow, Saint Bede the Venerable.
I don't know all my saints, do I?
Don't you know your saints? Well, there you go. He wrote the first history of England.
Wow. Well, there you go.
Or the ecclesiastical history. So yeah, it's from the 12th century. You don't know your 12th century monks. It's okay. Yeah,
well, I'll put it on the list. So it's a growing list, I'll admit.
Yeah.
Bede, welcome to the podcast. How you doing, brother?
Very good, Pete. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for making time, most and foremost, mate. I mean, I was just speaking before we came on that this whole journey with the whole podcast thing is a very strange and surreal thing, but mostly for me, it's a selfish endeavor of trying to speak to interesting people with more than anything else, because I've developed so much from speaking to people just like yourself, going down the mine of those personal development aspects. And when I first learned about red to blue gazing and some of the stuff we're going to speak about today, it came from a trusted friend who's gone through a myriad of experiences in the emergency services and spoke very highly of it. But when I was reading some of the documentation stuff, what really screamed out for me, and somewhere maybe I'd love for us to start, is about this aspect of almost being able to think clearly under pressure. I know that's not the only thing that it's built around, but that to me speaks so much about individuals in the emergency services. I know you work with the sports teams and everything like that, but just give us a little whistle-stop tour, elevator pitch of who you are and kind of where you come from, I suppose, to start with.
Sure. Well, I can't guarantee that I'll be very interesting, but
I wanted to jump in and just speak to you about a real ugly truth that despite the fact we are trying so hard, we get way too many messages and emails about mental well-being and mental health. And I recently came across something I think is going to be a real game changer. It's called Genesis. Now, this is really different because it's actually human-led mental and social well-being. It's not just an app somewhere that no one's ever going to use. They provide human-led, regular bite-sized approaches. I'm talking 15 minutes a time, using language in a structured learning approach to create safe spaces for teams to have these conversations. And they've got a whole bunch of free workshops coming up online. First one is the 23rd of February, and it's built around sleep and performance with Dr. Martin Jones as a human performance and sleep specialist. You can find all this in the link to the podcast. Another thing I'd specifically say looking at is their 90-day program, which has been designed exclusively for wellbeing leaders in the police and fire and rescue sectors. It actually gives you some tangible tools to have these structured conversations so we can genuinely start to reduce burnout, absenteeism, and general poor mental health. It's not just a tick box, guys. So scroll down, have a look in the notes to this podcast. The first one is on the 23rd of February. I'm going to be there. And the reason I'm actually going to attend something like this versus other stuff is because it's human-led. It's actually going to be real people talking in a way that I can relate to, and it's easy to implement with my team. So hopefully I'll see you there.
We've certainly worked in a lot of interesting areas, and we do have a perspective. I mean, I work for a company called Gazing Performance. We've now separated the business out into two different areas, really. It's in the red to blue that you're talking about is sort of such a demand for it now. We're setting that up as a separate business so we can scale it and get it to more people, because we started out years ago as a training business, and most of our work was in the corporate space. But even 20 years ago, the niche we were trying to sit in was around performance under pressure. Okay. That's a term that you hear all the time now. But 20 years ago, like early 2000s, late 90s even. It wasn't really a thing.
Hmm.
So that was our space, and thinking clearly is sort of at the heart of it. And you do say, yeah, it's relevant for when you think about firefighting.
Well, people think about
yeah.
pressure as it's a very wide spectrum, isn't it? It's a very personal thing. So it's one thing that will place somebody under perceived pressure. Someone else might sail through. We can think from the child attending their first, class in a new school or going to their first sports club on the weekend. We can think of, the parent going to an interview. We can think of the far end of the spectrum where we might have the professional athlete, or we might have the firefighter, the police officer, the CEO going into a presentation. So that spectrum is a very challenging thing to try and serve. So when you started thinking about like people behaving under pressure, was there a trigger for you? Because I know from yourself, your experienced sort of coach and mentor, and you've worked both in business and in sports. So when you think about pressure, is it the same in every situation, or have you found it to be a beast with many different sort of shades?
Look, it's common across domains. We were not just in sport, but across loads of different places with children, adults, businesses, sports people, NHS, doctors, nurses, the army, the works. What's consistent there is when we started, it was about helping people perform better. So we weren't in that sort of wellness space at all. It was all about you've got a job to do. And by the way, some people's starting point is I don't feel pressure. I just get on with it, and that's okay. Some athletes talk like that.
Do you think that's true, or do you think that's just they are so deep into their comfort zone that they don't experience it?
Well, I don't know whether it's true or not, but it's an
true
unusual...
is a harsh word. It's not like we're accusing them of lying or anything like that. But there is a strong connection, isn't there, between having some pressure, because it's almost like that. There's the old stimulation curve in sport, but also you see it just in personal stimulation where like it hits that sweet spot, doesn't it? So there is a real connection between performance and pressure.
Absolutely. So they're just defining pressure as people having a meltdown or something. But why we start with performance is always that if you want to get better, you're going to have to put yourself under pressure, and you've only really got yourself to where you are by doing some work or putting yourself in a place where you had to change from what you used to be. So pressure drives performance if you've got that intention to get better. Some people want to muddle along, and that's okay, But if you generally want to get better at something, it comes with pressure, unfortunately. Where it comes from, there's lots of places. It could be a million different things for a million different individuals, but generally it's around expectations, either from yourself or from other people. And when those go up, that creates pressure. And some people run towards that, and sometimes you don't have you not feel resourced to meet that expectation, so you have a little bit of a wobble. Sometimes the expectations aren't clear, and that's a different sort of pressure. Another place it comes from is scrutiny. Are there a lot of people going to be looking at this, or putting yourself under the microscope? And then it's about the consequences. So those sort of three general areas say, look, it's one of those things that often puts people under pressure. But if you think about leading a team, the way to get them better is to give them very clear expectation, scrutinize what they're doing in a helpful, and put in place some consequences, good or bad. That'll help drive them forward, pull them forward. That's your job. Your job, if you're managing, leading, whatever, is to put people under pressure to develop and grow. Everyone has a threshold, though, so you got to be careful about trying to wring more and more and more out of people, and that's what you see at the moment. There's some really unrealistic expectations of people, and I say unrealistic because what hasn't happened is they haven't been resourced to meet that higher level of expectation. That often happens in corporate world. You want to do a lot more next year, but we're not going to give you any more resources.
I want to do more with the same, or I want to do more with less, which can often be a challenge. But I part of me feels like all pressure is kind of self-imposed, though, because there's a quote I have on my wall, and many of which I have on my wall. But it's like I always say that all of us are self-made, but only the successful will admit it. And what I mean by that is pressure is something based on your perception. In my history, when I hear people go, I'm under a lot of pressure at work, I think you can sort of switch the things within that equation and look at it like, the value of importance I place on my employment has allowed it to put me under pressure. Because ultimately, if I didn't care about it at all, I wouldn't feel under pressure. And there's again, without playing clever word games or something like that, we all value something. So pressure is inevitable. You will value the opinion of your partner. You value the, staying employed, value, progression or something like that. So pressure is always going to exist. But as it relates to performance, how do we know when we are applying too much pressure, or how do we know when things have become unhealthy?
I guess from the response you get from it. So if you think about the first thing, when people are under pressure, they tend to lose a bit of perspective around their performance. So how you're doing, most of us middle along, and that's fine. But when pressure comes into play, you can start to think in extremes. Oh, that was a disaster, or I was brilliant. You just sort of go 0 or 100 on it, and it's never about that. And if you're trying to get better, and you start with performance first, you're just trying to get a little bit better. That never ends. Now, when you then go, okay, what's the correlation between getting a little bit better and pressure, or having a meltdown and pressure? It can drive you both ways. Pressure can drive you forward, or it can melt you down. And what determines that, I guess, is how resourced you are for it, or how much you want the thing that you're trying to achieve. So, we would often work a lot at an elite end with people who are really driven to get better, and they've decided to do it and they want to do it, and it is driven by them. But more often than not, we're coming into places that have been told to get better, and we're not very welcome at all. And if you go into quotation marks, sent in by some somebody to work at a failing A&E department, for example, you go into that space and they've been told, because of certain measures, you're in this, we're going to come in and Gaze is going to help you. You're not very welcome when you come in. They've had thousands of consultants come in, and that's not really the issue. So sometimes you go into places where they're not really welcoming, let's treat pressure as a privilege. And it's actually, pressure is a real problem, and it's to do with resources and all sorts of stuff. Getting off topic there, but it can drive you forward, it can melt you down, and that can be determined on the individual, sure. But I think to isolate the individual from the environment that you're in is a bit of a problem as well.
Sorry, how do we look to develop this like level of self-awareness? Do you have to get it wrong before you get it right, so that you can think clearly when you start to feel that sense? Because some people will term it as anxiety, some will term it as tenseness, some will feel nervous. Ultimately, everything there is pointing to me towards the fact that some form of pressure is mounting in their head, and their ability to think clearly and accurately, is that sort of fog is starting to descend, isn't it?
Well, you're starting to talk now about the role of mentality in driving people forward, and that's a big part of it. It's not the only part of it, and I think it depends who you're talking about. If you're just talking about general population who just want to go to work and do feel okay about it, do a good job, or you're talking about people who are in extreme environments, there's sort of a difference to that. But what's common, if you think about times when you've done really well under pressure, or times when you haven't done really well, mentality is a part of it. Mindset is one part of it. But skills are the other part. Did you have the skills to be able to do that job or cope with that space? And the third part of that, we talk about this little triangle, is structure. What processes are in place? What resources have you got? So we sort of start with this simple line, 0 to 100. So where you think you're at the moment, where do you want to get to, or you're trying to get a little bit better? Well, what will determine that is the quality of the structure, skill set, and mindset that you've got in place. And sometimes people treat mindset in isolation, and that's okay, but it just means that you're not integrating it into your systems, your processes, and into your general skills. I can't even remember what your question was. I'm starting to ramble there.
No, there wasn't a question. Don't worry. For me, when you say about mindset is almost everything to me. But when I'm entering a situation, when for example the bells go down and I'm jumping on the truck with the crews, or when a police officer gets the call when they're heading to a domestic property and there's violence ensuing or something's happening, how early into that level of self-awareness, these when we talk about this skill set or this mindset, is this something we should already have in our heads? Is this a system or a process that we can adopt, or do you have to wait until you're in the noise, once you've jumped in the pool and you're drowning, and then try and think about the skill set?
Yeah, well, all of those things, but I don't think people academically think about it like that. They just involve themselves in the job. When you review it, you go, well, did I do well or not? And did my mindset play a part in that or not? And sometimes it's unhelpful and sometimes it's really helpful. The pressure you're describing is the default position people go to for army, police, nurses, doctors, firefighters. But in those moments, actually, people tend to do pretty well. It's the boring bits back at base or at the station when your colleague's being a bit of a dick and you can have a little meltdown and you go home grumpy and all that sort of stuff. That could be just as much pressure. The barracks mentality is just as much pressure. In those moments where you really have to just connect in, you don't sort of have the luxury all the time of having a little bit of a meltdown. You want to think that the training is put in place is resourcing people on the front line to deal with those situations really well. It's awful when it doesn't, when you see that.
I don't think it's remotely formally trained at all. And I'm sure hopefully someone will write in or tell me that that's not the case. But I, in my 17, 18 years or whatever, have never formally had anyone sit down and speak about the mindset of, even when we start doing things like incident command. I mean, just as a firefighter, this would be incredibly relevant, just as a first responder coming into their role, police, ambulance, whatever it might be. But then certainly as you get into a position where the decisions you're making can have very real, tangible impact on somebody's livelihood, somebody's home, somebody's business, and even their life if they make it out of this situation in the next 20 minutes. And that is the time when fear, doubt, uncertainty, people start to have distorted thinking, and almost lose rationale. They think very disconnectedly.
Yeah, it's easy to see and describe, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. Sometimes we term it rabbit in the headlights. Somebody who is very intelligent, very knowledgeable in the office or in the watch room, but then when you put them in the incident ground, all that's changed is the situation. I was a lifeguard before I joined the emergency services, and they always used to tell me the only difference between you and the victim is the mindset that you enter the water, because ultimately you're just jumping in with with the t-shirt and shorts on or something like that.
Well, that's not true though.
Yeah, you can swim, they can't.
That's not true though, because you can probably swim better.
Yes, but you're both entering a very hostile, very dangerous environment, and you're going to physically engage with someone who is in distress, and you like you say, you're a confident swimmer on your own, but you're now about to introduce an unknown factor into that.
Yeah, you will have trained in those sort of situations. So even though it might not have been formally separated out, we're going to do train your mentality in this, it will have been happening sort of by default. But you're right, there's a real gap. I think it's being filled a lot now, and I'm not a big fan of the way that it's often done, because it's done in a way that's too complicated to remember and use when you're in the heat of the moment, or it's done in an unrealistic way, and it's done separately. I'll give you an example. I won't name the team. I probably will slip up and do that later, but it's an international rugby team. Okay. So they're all elite theoretically. And you draw the line and you go, okay, is there 100? Where are we going to? What's the go? Okay, you want to do well in the World Cup, blah, blah, blah. Where are you at? Fine. And you draw up a little equation, whether it's structure, skill set, mindset, or you go in sport, people tend to think about it in terms of physical, technical, tactical, mental. And you draw out and go, okay, what are you working on? What's good? Yep, radio. Which one of those is the most important? And they all say mentality. Even if you go structure, skill set, mindset, and you ask a bunch of kids or teachers in the classroom, they all go, it's mindset's the most important. And then you go, well, okay, that's great. how much time in this camp, I asked the rugby team, how much time have you spent on it? And they haven't done anything. So that, they get into the gym and they spend all that time on the physicality, the technical and the tactical. But then they also say mentality is the most important thing. Now, which I said that's fantastic because I've got a really good mindset. Can I play on Saturday? And they, for some reason, didn't want me in the team. So it's not the only thing. But when they say everybody seems to acknowledge now that's a really important part. And then the question becomes, okay, well, how do you train it? Because you said that you didn't. And in fact, could call you out on the way you train, because when you talked about training for the British Firefighter Challenge, is that what it's called, the BFC? Yeah. You said that you spend it made me think of this rugby team when you said it, because you said there's a lot of blokes out there who spend time on working on the skills and the transition and this sort of stuff. I just go full out on my physical.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of marginal gains to be had by developing those skill sets as well, and that's certainly done out of ignorance for me. But the guy that you, sorry to carry on, but the guy that you said introduced us, he's older, and he went into the British Firefighter Challenge, and he spent a lot of time training his mentality. He's got a bulletproof mentality anyway, though. He's very much a hero of mine, that specific individual, because, everyone can be fit and healthy in their 20s. It's kind of a trick. It's not really, it's not really anything to do with your mindset or anything like that. You can just get away with being very physically fit.
Yeah.
But I always think of it like a narrowing path as you go up a mountain as we get older, just to go down this rabbit hole for a second. It's like health and fitness is easier when you're younger, because you don't have as much self-awareness. You can't cast your mind into the future or the past very well. You can only believe that what is here right now will last forever. So as you get older, everything gets a little bit harder. It's not impossible. Then the path just narrows, doesn't it, as you go up the mountain? And the only thing that's going to keep you on that path isn't necessarily how fit you are or what your genetics are. It's your mindset, because some of the fittest people in the world will fall off that mountain. They'll crash and burn in a pile halfway up, and we'll pass them every now and again because their mindset ultimately failed them, or they failed it. And that sounds a little bit horrible. Failed is a very strong word. I often think the best physical athletes in the world probably never make it onto the stage. The strongest person in the world is probably in a South African farm somewhere, just lifting tractors, and no one will ever see him. The person that sprints the fastest, runs the furthest, is the best rugby player. They just won't be in a situation where they get an opportunity to perform on that level. The people that we watch on TV every day, I always believe, are a result of mindset. That's what it really is. We look at them through a lens of physicality, but actually most could achieve, and I don't diminish that because I'm not as fit as them, but we diminish the mindset just by looking at the physicality and going, oh, they've just got great genetics. Well, so are a lot of people, but it's the mindset, isn't it?
Yeah, and you either select people who have a sort of natural tendency of that, or you believe that you can develop it and you have a responsibility to develop it. And the problem with that team, their coaching environment hasn't they've talked about it, but the way they then go to develop mentality is not, it's just either they're not doing it or they do it in a way that treats it like a problem. So this is what often happens. You go, okay, it's all about mindset. So we're going to outsource that bit to the white coat brigade. We'll get a psychologist in. And if you've got a little problem, you go and see the psychologist. And that's changing now because they're doing stuff in a more integrated way. And most teams do have psychologists in there, and it's part of the team. They do all that sort of good work, but it's often treated as a problem rather than something that's normal part of performance that you should develop as a skill. And if you just leave it to learning by experience, you can't fast track, your performance.
Yeah, there's no specificity within that, because if you just applied that template again to fitness and just said, oh, well, hopefully you'll just keep doing movementy things and you'll get progressively fitter. Well, probably not. There needs to be some specificity. There needs to be progression. There needs to be, almost a strategy behind what we're trying to do. Otherwise, we're, fishing in the dark.
Well, do you agree that? Well, you've already said it tends to get the least attention, mental training or mentality training or mindset skills, whatever you call it. But it's the thing that varies the most. particularly
It's the
when
thing that
people are
makes
under
for great
pressure.
emergency services operators as well. It's not about
Yeah.
their knowledge or their skill set, because I can teach you
No.
both of those. I mean,
Well,
I
it won't
myself, I work in the
change.
training department. I can teach you those things, but
Yeah.
a mindset, I would always pick that 1,000 times. And that's what frustrates me so much when some people
Yeah.
go, "Oh, so and so though, she's a teacher for 5 years. She'll be a rubbish
Yeah.
firefighter," or and I'm like, "You're missing it. You're not even the skill set. I can literally
Yeah.
teach you it in like 4 months. I can make you competent and
Yeah.
functional."
Yeah.
But your
Well, that's why
mindset,
people
you
always
could do
say
30
mindset
years
is the first
mindset,
thing.
and it might never
Yeah.
change. Might never change
Yeah.
because you're so focused.
Yeah.
You hide behind your practical skill sets. And I love what you said there around sort of doing it from the start as well. You said how this mental side is getting more of a focus. I think of it the same with our mental health and our sort of cognitive ability. We only tend to address it in the emergency services or in any sector really when it becomes a problem. You say, I'm struggling
Yes.
with my mental health, I'm struggling with
Yeah.
pressure, I'm struggling to cope. But in
Yeah.
many services, certainly in emergency services, you will have a fitness test to join. Well, then why don't you have
Yeah.
a psychological check-in? Do you know what I mean? Because also then it
Well,
makes it
I'll tell you
something
why.
you do. Go on, please.
Well, I have a perspective on it. It might not be true, but I think one of the reasons it's not an accident. It's a flaw, and it's means it's deliberate. Coaches and places don't go there because they consider it a specialist area because it's harder to define than a physical thing. Like you talk about getting fit.
It's hard to put a
So it's a
metric.
bit more mysterious. Yeah. And then when it is described, it's often described in a difficult way. So people might start by talking about, psychological terms. Your average firefighter, and I don't know, I haven't worked with many. If I started off talking about some of those terms, they instantly put off. So you got to find a way to engage people on this topic to make it a normal part. Do you agree that mindset's part of what you do? Okay, then how are you going to practice it and get better at it? And that's the question. So if you agree that it's important, then how are you going to do it? So let's not treat it like a problem. Let's just treat it like a skill. If it's a skill, that means you can practice it, train it, and describe it. But then some skills are taught in a really complicated way. You just mentioned being a lifeguard. Think about how people learn to swim. What's the first bit you teach when you teach a kid to swim?
Throw them in the deep end. No, sorry.
Well, you can. That's right. You can do that, but you tend to start not by put your hand this way and your arms. Well, when
teach them about. I taught my daughter
daughters
about the mechanics of water and how we can push it and move it, and we just stood in water and created waves towards each other so that she could understand that it was something that she could pull herself along in. It is something that, if treated in a certain way, you can impart energy into water. And I think that very statement came from my background in pumping and hydraulics and mechanical stuff like that. Is your body can impart energy into water. It can propel you forwards and backwards. So she couldn't sort of swim. So she just stood there and I would make a wave of water and push it at her, and it would obviously knock her backwards.
Right.
And I says the same concept is true. So if you put both your hands in front of you and pull backwards really hard, you will feel your feet, start to slowly move forwards. Anyway, we'll go into but I always say to people, like, this is what I'm on about mindset, because I'm like, if you can, I think, like, if you can understand teaching, you can teach the basics of most things, because actually it's just taking the person from what they know to what they don't know. And you can do the first steps, 1, 2, 3. I'm not going to teach her how to become Michael Phelps, but it's just about, for me, it's about understanding where that person is. And that's so what I love so much about the red to blue concept. It has some great words, and there's different templates I've got up in front of me now, like the red to blue mindset toolkit that I was looking at earlier. It really helps contextualize in more of a simplistic fashion, because it's not too wordy. It's not, otherwise I won't be able to understand it myself. But like, it helps the person understand or put words to where they are now, so that they can almost articulate why they're in the red, why they're struggling.
Well, what you're talking about now, though, will sound gobbledygook for people, because you got
it might do, and I can do that sometimes. I can get down.
Well, I was laughing because I was thinking, your poor daughter, is she having any fun in the pool? Most people, to that question, what's the prime big thing that everything's built around in swimming? you said movement through water, and you're probably right because you know more about it than me. But most normal people just say floating. You learn to float, and then you learn to move. And if you think about passing a ball or riding a bike, there's one big thing, balance, and then everything else comes from it. But you see dads and mums teaching their kids to ride a bike, and there's too much information coming at them. And that's what happens when people go in. We're going to talk about mentality, and suddenly it becomes quite a complicated topic.
I think when we speak in these terms as well, people do like complexity. I see this, or I used to see this when I worked in the fitness space. People like to justify themselves by making the thing they're trying to describe overly complex because they're worried. And this is what I love about some
details. Important.
The details are important, but you guys and girls seem to have a discipline of not over complicating things. Because otherwise it just becomes something that's like, I always say it's like a warm bath. Like you hear some really articulate intellectual speak. It's a warm bath. Like you feel good when you leave the session, but you've not got anything to use. You feel like that was fascinating, but I've got nothing to use. Whereas when I look at this toolkit, I'm like, it's practical. You know, the can't control, can influence, can control, like how I move through them. Hey folks, just wanted to jump in with a quick piece around firefighter health and well-being. Whether you are trying to join the fire service and pass them tricky fitness tests, if you are currently serving, or if you are coming up to that next chapter of your life, retiring from the emergency services, we get so many different questions around it. So in partnership with Fitness for the Frontline, we have come up with a series of guidance and programs specifically designed to reflect the physical elements of the role of a firefighter. So whether it's carrying an LPP across an overgrown field, lifting a ladder above your head under running it, or wrestling with cutting gear for 30 plus minutes at some kind of complicated RTC, our bodies are required to lift, push, and carry objects in very specific circumstances. That is effectively what Fitness on the Frontline focuses on, as well as the longer term aspects of overall health and wellness for our firefighters. Now, we are definitely not about to be smashing out world records or getting that beach body ready in 6 weeks rubbish. The systems and programs that we put in place are adjusted for people's current fitness levels, and they're not a prescriptive way or a one-size-fits-all BS. It is very likely for myself personally that I'm still going to be a firefighter when I'm 60 plus, so longevity in the role is really important to me, and I know it is for so many people out there. It all starts with no obligation, 7 days worth of the programming, absolutely free. So whether you're joining, serving, or looking at the next chapter in your life, Fitness for the Frontline is designed by firefighters for firefighters. Now back to the show.
That's great feedback. Thank you, because that's part of my job, is to make it really accessible for people. Because if it's important, you know, there's eight. I think, you know, we've got a business, we've got to market it and so on. But who's our target audience? So there's 8 billion people who could do with getting help with mindset, not just being a problem. And it's not a thing like fitness or yoga or whatever. It is everything, all day, every moment in your day is to, you know, whether you're thinking clearly or having a wee moment or meltdown, it's all the time. So it's really important, and it applies to everybody. So if we can get it described in a way that's really accessible for people, and I think also acceptable, you know, people buy into it. Because you go into a room like that rugby team or a classroom, there's 30% of people there normally who are really not interested in this topic or a little bit resistant. And we've got to start with getting rid of that. So the first thing we do is, and this isn't a good example of it on a podcast where we're rambling on, but we try and get out of the way of the topic as much as possible. So when we started 20 years ago as a training business, you know, we had an academic, Dr. Kerry Evans, we had Renzi, who's a graphic designer and a martial artist, and we had some business people. But we started that business thinking, well, how are we going to do some training that actually works? Because most training doesn't. You know, in the corporate space, and this was a figure from IBM, 80% of training doesn't get used after the classroom.
That's what I'm saying. That's the warm bath. It's the you come in and do a tap dance in front of me, and I go, oh, that was interesting, wasn't it? And this is where you see them on like development days or leadership days or like employee days where a speaker will come in. It's a fascinating topic, but you're like,
there's a place
probably never going to use it.
Yeah. There's a place for it, but it won't work when you need it most, which is when you're under pressure. So that formed our product, if you like, which is everything. The only thing that people live with is one page. So even if it's a really complicated topic like leadership or selling or large account management, whatever it is, everything was described on one page, and we've just spent 20 years getting those we call them maps, one-page maps, just worked on it and refined, so it's accessible for people to understand it. But it's also not a guru type approach. It's not about me or Martin or Jenny, whoever's delivering it. It's just, here's a very neutral topic and you can engage in it. And does it apply to you and your job? Which is why I can walk into a space that I'm not part of and be accepted, if you like, and the topic can be used, and then they go off and use it because I'm not really part of it. It's just a thing that they can use.
I think those one pages must have been a tremendous discipline, because I struggle with like with the podcast. I struggle with brevity because I tend to, as maybe obvious already, like I tend to try and explain things 5 times just because I'm so excited about it. Whereas actually, why use 27 words when 6 will do? And I'm really rubbish at that. We spoke before we came on about like iterative cycles of learning and personal development. That part of my cycle has to I keep running it, because even as I listen to myself now, I'm like, brevity, goddamn brevity is what I struggle with.
Look, that'll be your greatest strength. I guarantee it. You're just saying that there's some downsides to it. And the answer to that, by the way, my view, isn't a mentality thing. It might be a mentality thing. It's a structure thing. So you just go back to just structuring your main points before you can get into the detail. When part of my job is to train others to train the red to blue concept to people, and we drill them on having a skeleton before they do their delivery. So you've got all your slides or your templates or your topic or whatever, but you've got to have a one-page skeleton so that under pressure you can zoom out and just zoom back into what you're talking about.
So when we talk about these one pages, I wanted to have a look or a sort of gaze into them, but I also wanted to ask you something. It's probably not something I mentioned before we came on, but one of the documents has a really good step within it where it looks at different strategies about finding yourself in certain situations and how you might deal in those certain situations. And it reminded me almost of the Excel function of an if-then. Do you know what I mean? Where it talks about, if I find myself in these situations, because when you do talk to people about pressure, they could probably articulate 3 or 4 situations where they would feel pressure. And like, it's define how you feel it. What are you feeling in your body? Where are you feeling it in your body? What do you think is about to happen versus what actually happens? And then you have a number of different physical rituals or strategies, different things that may be a bit wishy-washy to certain people, because I know things like breathing and spatial awareness are some of those. But is that a tool you would find useful with most teams, or do you think that's specific to certain people that are struggling with certain challenges?
I think it's great. I just wouldn't start there. It's like your poor daughter learning the movements of water. I'd probably just jump in, like you said first, jump in the deep end, have a bit of a splash around, see what happens. So when we want to get going on training this skill, we want to make it really clear and simple. And you start with, what's the big idea? So that's where we start. And we get people just to describe a bad day in the office, a bad day at the fire station, or a bad day on the, in the army, or a bad day at school. And people can do that, or a bad day at work. It's very easy to come with that list. And then you sort of go, well, look, these things happen. They're not going to go away. There'll be something about those things that's to do with structure, some about skill, some about mindset. So all we're going to give you is a little tool that you can use when those things are happening. And it simply describes the big thing, which is where your attention goes, your energy will follow. And from there, you can draw out this 2 heads. You've either got your attention on task, you're engaged in it, you're doing it, and you draw another little picture, which shows a little red head, and it's busy inside, or you're diverted, your attention somewhere else. Once you've sort of described this, and it's a picture that you draw for people, there you go, do you recognize those 2 heads? And you go, yeah. Well, who goes in the red? Well, everybody. So that's pretty cool. It's just a little description. I'm either engaged or I'm not. No, everybody knows that already. That's not new. What people want to know is, well, how do I move from the red to the blue when I'm under
How quickly can I
restriction?
make that system of recognition, and then getting that self-awareness to recognize it, but then
Yeah.
also
So
having
we've just
strategies that you can implement to move you back into the blue,
yeah.
and how quickly you can do that transition. Because like I hit that mental reset button like I'm on cocaine or something. I find myself regularly like just going backwards in my mind to a conversation earlier, or jumping forward in the future to anticipating something that's coming up. And I think to myself, God, get back in the present. And I try. I have certain things that I try and do. And I saw a series of strategies as I was looking through the documents that we've shared with each other. But it's hard. It's hard to do. And like I love what you said there, that
Well,
you're
it's
never going
a
to fix
skill.
it. It's like you're not going to become a monk where you never enter the red ever again. Everyone goes there. Everyone has good days and bad days, but everyone can improve. It's finding those trends, and I suppose being excited about implementing these simplistic actions as and when you recognize it. But it's hard though.
Well, it's a skill. Some people
Yeah.
are better at it than others, but everybody's got to practice it. Now, I wouldn't start by practicing all those difficult things. I'll just start with the basics of being clear about what the skill is, because it's often then described as don't think about stuff you can't control, just focus on what you can control. But
Stoic
everybody
principles,
knows
yeah.
it. Yeah, so sort of controllables. A red head is when you are focused on stuff you can't control, and you're flipping out about what's happened, or you're worrying about stuff that's coming up, and it's not fair, poor me, screw you, blah blah, all that stuff. And when you focus on stuff you can control, you're doing it, you're engaged. Everybody knows that.
Mm.
And the middle circle is what you can influence and all that. And you get people to write that down. You draw 3 circles on a page, and just from that bad day list, just put stuff in the red circle you can't control, put stuff in the blue circle. That's good. And then you sort of go, well, if you paid $100 for this session, which they don't, but if they did, you'd be a bit disappointed if that was the big revelation. Just focus on what you can control.
Oh,
You'd be a
yeah,
bit
would they
disappointed with that.
though? I mean, they would probably initially,
Yeah,
but I
it's
remember
not
hearing the
new.
story of it was a really big manufacturing company. I think it was somewhere in America, and there was a very simplistic solution to why the whole factory had come to a halt, basically. And the guy said, how much are you losing, hour on hour? And it was millions. It was a very simplistic fix, but the value you attach to a simplistic process is a very
Oh,
different thing. Like
absolutely.
if you can learn something very simplistic, but it's a huge game changer in your life, the simplicity of it frustrates you because you feel like how much you've struggled with it. It must be something really complex. And this has to be something that you're going to give me a eureka
Oh,
moment.
no, I didn't say that. I just meant it has to be a bit more of a description than just don't do that, do this.
Okay.
And that you go into the Waterstones and you pick up any book, XSAS Soldier or whatever, and a lot of the chapters are just be a bit faster, or, be a bit more resilient. Doesn't sort of describe what the skill is. And what I think we've done quite well is be really clear. Look, the starting point is to recognize when you're going there.
Okay.
And that is different to don't go there, because everybody will go there.
Mm.
So if you get better at recognizing that, and just having a language immediately after the first session, anyone's introduced to red to blue, immediately it's very hard not to think of that. Oh, I'm in the red. Just have that language. So it just starts with recognizing when I'm having that moment, and then you can get more technical about how well you do that. And then it's about movement. But there's an awful lot of work to do on getting better at letting stuff go. That's the hard bit. And then it's not about just, like you say, being a monk and having an empty head. It's literally about doing your functional job or whatever the task is you have to do. So the red side's quite interesting. People want to know, how come I divert? But it's very connected to the blue head and what you're doing. So doing the British Firefighter Challenge, I've never done it. Yeah, you can probably see because I'm on camera, I'd struggle to get up the stairs.
You know what though? I think that is a great example there, because I always say to people, somebody like me should never win something like that. I've got like 5 gold medals, but because I'm like 18 stone, mate. I always say that the fittest people that will win something like that should be around 13 stone. They should be a lot lighter than me. They should be quick. They should be agile. And I think it's offensive that I've ever won any of it And all of the success I can attribute that to is just mindset, because I'm not the fittest, I'm not the fastest.
Yeah.
I'm just willing to. There's fitter people than me that just don't push their body quite as far, I think. But that comes at a cost.
Yeah.
You know, I've had
But it
prolapsed
won't be all
discs,
mindset.
snap tendons, and all
Yeah.
that sort of jazz. Yes, you actually have
Yeah.
to do the thing as well,
Yeah.
of course. But I hate myself enough that I do it every day.
So I'm working with Gary. We just did, and you come back to, okay, we've got this concept now. I can recognize when I'm starting to divert. And that means that I might not follow my process. I might, for years ago, I ran a marathon and I stupidly had trained for a certain time. And then when the marathon went, I started chasing this girl that was running in front of me and I thought, I'll just run at her pace. And you blow up because I was diverted. I wasn't following, I didn't trust my process. It's very connected. So when you're doing that, there's a risk you get diverted, something goes wrong, and I start to panic. And then what you've done is connect back to your system, your process. I trust that because I've trained it, worked hard. You're fit. I'll get through it.
But coming back to an emergency services analogy, you can recognize when you're starting to fall into the red, definitely. But the problem is the very dynamic situation, the very nature of the dynamic situations that we face is that they escalate quickly. Do you know what I mean? We have to put in play, we have to create structure out of chaos very quickly. Someone is calling you because they're having the worst day of their life. They're trapped somewhere. Something is getting worse. The water is rising. The fire is getting hotter, whatever it might be. And as soon as you get there, it's not just the sensory overload of what's happening. It's also then everyone compounding that by reporting to you what you can already see a lot of the time. It's, and then saying, what should I do? What should I do? Even if you're not just a firefighter, but even if you're just a firefighter, the members of the public are looking at you as the solution. You might be going around the back and just doing a 360. Members of the public are telling you in pieces of information, and you can very quickly become overwhelmed with that because you feel like this is too much for one person. We've only got 4 people with us, and that is where I think people can really struggle. That's where mistakes get made. That's where the skill set can become detached, and it's almost like it sits behind a glass screen. You can't access your skills very well because you've become overstimulated. Does that make sense? It
totally makes sense. That is why we have a very, 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 very simple red head, blue head. I'm in the red. Because in that moment, you can't do much more than that. Now, so once I've recognized that, I'm flapping. Now, I'll give you an example. One of the, and I'm sure they won't mind me saying, one of the army regiments we worked with, the first one was the Gurkhas.
Wow.
Now, those soldiers are not the sort to say no or complain, right? It's not in their nature. But by introducing red to blue in that common language, they were able to say to their commanding officer, sir, you're in the red, sir. So in that heat of the moment, the CO's flapping, the 2IC could say, sir, you're in the red. And that was a real common language. It didn't have judgment on it. It just was a fact. So it was
but the leader's got to be in a position to be able to accept that feedback.
Well, you've introduced that common language. So
yeah, that would be tough for some people.
Yeah, very. But, well, it is if he was saying, look, you're making a bad decision. It's just like, I think you're in the red, sir. So it's a quick way to reset, get back. What you will do is, the skill there is to zoom out. And, if it's well described, isn't it? Decision making in the firefighter world, and, Dr. Cohen Hatton and what she's done, all that is well described. This is the process that you follow. The problem, and the Army is a good example, they've got a contingency plan for everything. They literally carry it around in their pocket. The question is, are they executing that from the red head or the blue head? So you're going into those situations, you've got a thing that you need to do, and you know what you should do if this is burning or that, and this is what you do. The bigger question, the first question is, am I in the red or the blue? So just having that really simple head in your head, that little picture is a great way to help you reset. It's not the only thing. You can then practice the process. You can practice how I move, and you can do all those other things that you talked about before. Whatever little ritual you've got to you might find that when you go into the red, you do it in a certain way You talk differently, or your physicality changes, you hunch your shoulders, or you go too fast. All of that slow is smooth and all that sort of stuff is about getting people back in the blue. And it is really important for an individual, but it's really useful in teams where you are going into that sort of environment to have a common language for it, because you've got a common language for everything else. Surgeons don't go, pass me the shiny sharp thing. It's like scalpel, bang. So this is about having a common language for mentality. And when it's wobbling, you can reset pretty quickly.
So how do people go, or how should people go about creating safe? I mean, I had a guest recently who said to me, safe spaces are where teams grow, which I always thought was a lovely thing to say. I probably said that wrong. He probably said it a little bit different. But you have to have a very safe space to be able to introduce a language. I think you do. And please correct me if I'm wrong. But in order to create a high-performing culture where instant feedback can be given like that, so that you can get back into your optimum level of stimulation, you can recognize that you're in the redhead. Like I sort of said a minute ago, that can be very triggering for people. So is there any ways, or is there any sort of inroads or strategies or approaches that you use or you've seen successfully utilized in the past that help people develop a safe space to have conversations? Like, I mean, ultimately, I suppose the presence of yourself or another member of your team being there is an indication that there is some receptiveness to what you're about to give them. But you've said yourself that
it starts
certain places you go to, it's not very. Some people might not be as accepting as others for it.
Well, it has to start with, are you going to work on your mentality? So that's where you start. And if you are, then just having that common language from red to blue is one way to do it. There are other ways. It is automatically just gives you some comfort there. You feel a bit more in control, and there's no judgment around it. It's normal. Everybody gets in the red. That's the first bit. Why wouldn't you? And you might get in the red when you're back in the barracks, or you might get in the red when you're high up a ladder, or when you're getting unsolicited feedback down the radio from your CO who's turned up late. You're the first on the scene and you're making those decisions. And then the big cheese comes in the big truck and says, have you done this and that? And you go, I haven't got time to do that now, but it's part of your job, so you have to. So in those moments, you might start to get resentful, or actually you suppress it all and you carry on, you do your job. And then when you get home and your partner says, can you put out the bins? You go, what? And it all comes out. It's all of that stuff. So just having a little, and it literally is a one-page map that starts making it normal, safe. Oh, this is what I'm in the red. Whew, let me reset. My kids have it.
Oh, gotcha. Dad, I love that. I was just going to say, you have a specific one developed for children. Do you go into schools and deliver that? The kids map, the one pager about moving our attention and some of the think, feel, act sides of red and blue and how they're articulated. I thought was lovely that you have that, and the characters are pretty cool as well for kids.
Well, definitely, and they get it. What often gets taught in schools is mindfulness and all that sort of stuff, which is great, but it doesn't give you a sense of performance and movement. So, okay, I'm going to be mindful and calm, but how am I going to go and do my maths test? So the blue side is coming up with your strategies, your what ifs for this question. So you're developing techniques to be more resilient. You're saying, okay, and kids understand pressure. That's why my daughter's first question when I said I taught a firefighter was, ask him if he gets nervous when he goes to a fire. She's 5 years old. But, they'll say to me, zoom out, Dad. I need to zoom out. You're in the red, Dad. It's just a little common language. It's normal. It's not a good or bad. They think it's,
Yeah.
Yes, of course we go into schools. And I think it's a really good time to start when kids are 7, 8, 9, 10. When we first worked in the elite sports space, it was better to sort of work with the 13, 14-year-old academy athletes who are going to get into the national team, because it's, you can start to develop that skill and normalize it then. So
Brian, I think
Ashton,
these mindset aspects as well are so valuable to children, because when you extrapolate that forward 20 years into those people as I would say, functioning adult or someone that's trying to function. I mean, we did a podcast a little while ago that focused around mental health in the emergency services, but they did have some statistics around just the working sector as a whole. And the number, I'm going to get the number wrong, but it was in the billions of how, they said stress and mental health is the number one cost to the economy, because it's not people's illiteracy and I'm not saying, the whole curriculum's terrible or anything like that, but, we don't, or it's great to see that people like yourself and Gaze in Red to Blue are invited into schools, but we historically haven't focused on this. We've focused on mathematics, history, and those things are important and all that sort of stuff. But I always used to use PE and physical education as an example of a real mindset development, because it does force teamwork, character building, understanding your own abilities, your ability to build rapport with other people, the competitive aspect of life. I always think there was so much more character built in physical education than there ever was in things like mathematics or literacy and stuff like that. But we never formally had anything
your filter,
like,
isn't it?
we never had anything like mindset training. But ultimately, that's what's materialized to be the biggest cost to adults. And that, I know we're just looking from an economical perspective there. When you look at the damage that's done within the family from someone struggling with pressure and how they may lash out verbally or even physically against partners, children, whatever it might be, because they probably recognize they're in the red, but they have no.
But they won't have that language for it.
No, and they don't. They could never think that.
No,
there's a way of getting out of it. They probably think that this is just who I am, and if people mess with me, then they're gonna get the horns, or that's just the way I behave, and people should recognize that.
Yeah,
but they don't recognize that actually they could, build some stepping stones to get them away from that.
Well, it works both ends. You've got very alpha macho type responses. You've got very shy responses. So you talk about sport being a great athlete, and it teaches you that sort of stuff. That's true, but that is your sort of thing, isn't it?
That's true. I've got my own bias there.
Yeah, we work with chess players, for example, one of the top chess coaches in the world, and it's the same thing. Being able to zoom out when you're under pressure, just sort of think ahead and calm down. Way you sit, way you stand, how you change, all that stuff. But very simply, it's red or blue. Am I in the red? Am I in the blue? It comes back to that. So you're right. When I had my first child, that put pressure on the family unit. When you have two, oh my God, it's like a nuclear bomb compared to the first one. So it's normal.
Me and my wife would like to have two children. We have three at the moment. So if anybody knows,
it's normal. You're right.
In a 22-year-old, we can drop him off tomorrow or any time they wish. But anyway,
everybody's interested in these elite sort of examples. It's the All Blacks or the Formula One drivers or whatever it is. But that's like a quarter of a percent of the population, which is why. And you're right. The impact of people who don't think clearly and don't think about consequences and can't zoom out and can't control their responses to things that happen. They haven't got a sort of a button to sort of just calm down a little bit. The consequences of that can be appalling. Now, this isn't,
I think by associating it with the quote unquote elite, they unconsciously distance themselves from picking up these tools. It's like saying, "Oh, those shovels and picks and and trowels are really good for builders, but I'm not a builder. I'm a bloody whatever. I'm an accountant. So those tools will be no use to me." And they almost associate it solely with elite environments. Whereas, like you say, these tools, everyone's got a mind. Everyone can simulate pressure and does experience pressure in their life. So these are not tools isolated to people in the emergency services or in elite sports.
I was with our marketing person today. She said, you just annoy me because it's, who am I meant to market this to? Because it's applicable to everybody. Yeah. And you're right. It's an accountant or whoever, people, but vulnerable people, anybody who's experienced any pressure, we can all get better at how we respond to it. And having a very simple language, which normalizes it, doesn't make it a problem. Just say, okay, well, we can work on getting better at that. So it's normal to feel under pressure. It's normal to sort of get stuck. How do you zoom out and get movement again? Red head, blue head. It's just the language we use. It's just cognitive psychology. It's the same as self one, self two. It's the same as the chimp model. It's all of that stuff. It's just packaged in a way. It's a lot more, I think, acceptable for people. It's not. It's not about a guru coming in to teach you as a student. It's just a very neutral piece of paper. It's got a little mirror on it. You can look at it and go, "Where are you? Locate yourself." and what puts you there, and can you get back in the blue a little bit quicker, and what would you do? How could you do it? So it treats people like they know this stuff already. Here's just a little tool that can help you get better at it. So it's quite accessible, and those alpha people who pretend they're not under pressure sort of melt away and say, oh, that could be quite useful for me. And the shy people,
I worry about them people. I worry about those when I do interviews for people entering the emergency services, because when I say, oh, how do you deal with pressure, or what would you like to do? If people say, I'd never struggle with pressure, or I've never failed, sometimes like that, I'm like, well, that's fucking worrying, because you will fail at some point, and if you haven't had to evolve your character through a failure or through pressure already, then you're quite unpredictable, because you are going to experience it at some point in time, and likely in this job you will. So if you might crumble, I almost want to hear that you've been over.
Well, they will be very fragile. Yeah,
100%.
Of course they will. But see, like the frog in a well doesn't know the ocean, right? So they've probably never been in an environment where they've coming back to that point around safety. That's sort of your starting point. Make people feel safe where you can fail, and it's not, you think about red to blue on a scale rather than an either or. And when teams are melting down, that's when you can detect, it becomes very narrow. They're defending the status quo. So when a mistake is made, you hide it. Feedback is criticism or praise. When you're trying to get better, you've got a much broader view, what we call blue head. It's broader. You're trying to get better. So feedback's welcome. Mistakes are expected because we're on the edge. So people who come in and say, I never make mistakes, they've only ever operated probably in those sorts of environments. So, but it's for me, that's just an indication that they're sort of in the red a little bit. It could be a response to just pressure themselves. That's how they cope with it themselves, by pretending it's not happening. Now, that's not a very useful way to do it. So you just want to train people to do it in a different way.
Yes, absolutely. Certainly in our sector, that aspect of freeze or shutting down or limiting your cognitive exposure to something isn't going to be effective, because you can't run away from what we're engaged in. And it might be getting worse. Despite your best efforts, people die in the emergency services every day, both operational staff, but certainly the communities that we serve. You can do everything right and still lose.
Yeah.
If you frame it as losing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I've had some very difficult customers in the army. People, people joke, well, if you did, totally very extreme responses. But I was coming back to the lady I know who worked in the forensic crime scene stuff. One of the things she was saying is one of the challenges she's got to train her new people is that they can't expose them to certain things like they used to be able to. So it's sort of hard to develop the conditioning, because you want to keep people safe, but at some point to get people better, you need to put them in places where they flap a little bit so they can learn from it.
Yeah.
And if you chuck people in too soon without the resources and skills, they don't learn from it. So no pain, no gain type of stuff. It's not just nonsense, but just one of the flaws in, elite sports coaching is they think they've taken people to the level of pressure, but they haven't really. So years ago, people say, oh, you can't train penalties, kickouts, you just can't recreate that pressure. That attitude's changed now. People try and recreate it as much as possible, which is what you do in the fire service, I'm sure. I mean, I've been down to the fire service college.
I do, but again, you're right. I mean, I work in our training department now, and there's been a pendulum swing there, which obviously my own bias, I will try and recalibrate it to where I feel it should be. But I feel it went from high pressure, far too many mistakes, and sometimes an unhealthy environment of screaming and shouting and trying to overwhelm people with pressure too soon before they really had a tangible hold on some of the skill sets that they needed to use to whatever pitch ladders go into, and breathing apparatus environment, whatever it might be, water rescue and all those sorts of stuff. They didn't have the skill set yet, and you were trying to apply too much pressure. Whereas the pendulum then swung to a very overly soft, I would say, where everyone's on a first name basis. We don't place you in a position, which is fine if you're going to be operating in an environment where that will always be the case. And we did set a few people up for fail. We sold them a vision of the emergency services that wasn't actually true. And I think there is a cohort of people out there operating currently, or many have left, that couldn't deal with it, couldn't deal with the way they would be spoke to by the public, or the way they would be spoke to by an incident commander. It was too abrupt and assertive.
Well, we've got to train you. If you're not training people for that sort of stuff. So I would go to some of the army training places, and the environment. The reason people are there, things ironed and buttons in the right place and no hands in pockets, all those sorts of things. Those little things are really important to create that environment, that safety, those standards. Have we got the standards in place around the little things? Because if we don't, then the big things are going to be affected.
That's it. It's the old, how you do one thing is how you do everything. Yeah. That thing is irrelevant. You're right. It's actually irrelevant in isolation, but it's your behavior, it's your character, it's your standards is what I'm judging, not that thing in isolation. I don't care whether you did or didn't, button up your shirt on that point. It's underneath your jumper and I can't see, but it's what you're doing. They always say it's the things you do when no one's watching, isn't it? And that's about, checking your breathing apparatus set before you hand it over to the next person. It's,
all of those things are so important. The rituals, all the unspoken stuff, that's your culture. That's about creating a safe environment. So some of my background is in martial arts. So the dojo is a place where ordinary people walk in off the street, and 5 years later they're doing pretty extraordinary things, and they're tested to become a black belt or whatever. And different styles do different things. Ours is sort of an old school traditional style. It still has contact fighting and stuff like that, but the rituals and all of that stuff around what happens in the dojo keep people safe. So if people aren't doing the bowing and the basic etiquette, it's an indication that they're not going to be safe when it's pressure time. So all of those little things are really important, I think. We're wandering off topic.
No, it's wonderful, mate. I think that's what makes it most interesting, to be honest. That's the natural aspect of podcasting that I personally find most interesting. And when I look at the research and when I speak to people, it's that it's not corporate-y, it's not formal. And that's why sometimes I'm a little, and it changes depending on who I'm talking to, but sometimes I'm a little bit fast and loose in my language, because it should be natural. If you try and make it too polished, it becomes, you can't connect with it. Do you know what I mean? And I know you'll know that far better than me from teaching the material that you teach and teams that you speak with. If it's too corporate-y, it'll seem sexy to the upper echelons of leadership, but they're not the ones that really need it, because they're, by nature of the fact they are where they are, usually suggests they've got a grasp of some form on their own mental disciplines, and they were able to do something in a useful way to get where they are. It's the rest of the organization who are flailing in the wash of mental challenge and their inability to deal with pressure very well.
It's probably the one thing we haven't talked about, is that idea of diverting people deliberately.
So as we close, help me understand, when people have been listening to what we've been talking about today, how do people go about creating those kind of safe spaces to sort of practice some of these strategies, I suppose?
Well, our perspective is through the red to blue model. So you give people common language and a common understanding. Look, mentality is about this. And it's just a way to describe it, and we're going to practice it. And when people will go, okay, this is going to be our language for talking about mentality will pop up in all sorts of different areas. And if you're coaching or training people, you can go, I'm going to try and divert you today. Your job is to stay on task. So you can, have one coach who would try and trick a player and, tell the player off for dropping passes all the time. And you'd watch the whole team sort of melt down and feel sorry for the player, because it was the other bloke who was throwing terrible passes. They didn't know that the coach had asked him to do that. And the coach would then stop and say, look, what are you doing? You're all off task. And I've done this deliberately to try and trick you. So it just gives a bit, and you can do that when I go in and do for different audiences. I won't teach red to blue from a flip chart or with slides. I'll just get them do a little boxing routine or some groundwork, little wrestling routine or something. And you just say, look, it's about clarity. This is what I want you to do. And then you start diverting them. You say, look, this is what you're allowed to do. And then you just give them a clip around the head or something and see what happens. You say, what are you doing? So you can sort of turn it into a physical thing, and you just go, okay, this is what happened. How are you going to adapt? So you start to sort of, give a bit of context for performance pressure, and it's not all about just understanding how you're feeling. It's also about what you're doing.
So when I hear that, there's many ways I can think of distraction methods I've used with people before. And even when I just put it back into a sporting context, I remember reading, when you read Tiger Woods' autobiography, his dad used to,
brilliant,
smash bricks around while he was, on the drive, or he would throw balls against something, or he would bang pans together during his backswing. And I've been in meetings before where someone was trying to deal with pressure and they were working with somebody, and the person would begin to clap or bang on something, or they would stand very close to the individual. This individual struggled with speaking in public, and they would come and stand really close to them, really invading their personal space, and little strategies like that. I'm not saying these are, this is an exhaustive list, but you're right, yeah.
They won't work unless that person feels safe and understands why that's happening.
Yes, of course.
So they
don't just do it spontaneously. Don't know what triggers somebody and then just go about trying to trigger them.
Yeah, that's right. But when you've got a language, red to blue, I'm going to try and put you red. You're going to try and stay on task. That makes it easier to do and a challenge, and people understand it. It's not no pain. No, I remember Joe Lydon telling a story about when he used to be woken up in the middle of a rugby league, England, Great Britain rugby league training camp at 3 a.m. to run around for 5 kilometres or something. He said, why the hell are we doing this? Looking back, to create some resilience and team bonding, but without any context, people just thought, oh, this is bloody ridiculous. And it doesn't have to be like that anymore. You go, look, we're trying to get better. You're going to be under pressure. Thinking ahead to that moment, we've got to try and practice for that now. And that's quite hard to do when you talk to kids in the classroom. Look, your exam isn't today, but I'm sure when you're on exam day, or your guitar recital at assembly isn't today, but we can practice some little things mentally that are going to help you on that day. That's the hard thing to try and convince people to do, because most people don't invest time in doing that. They don't think.
Well, also, they think they're too cool for it sometimes. They can struggle with that aspect of it, even though they recognise that
they don't know how to. They don't know how to, and it's too complicated or it's too silly. So just making that fun and an enjoyable thing to do, and a normal thing to do. Why would we not normalise mental skills training and not always be a health problem? Sometimes it is, obviously, and it needs specialist help. And I would never, encroach onto that space.
No, but I think people use that as an excuse not to focus on it, because they use the very small percentage of people that probably do need medication or professional help, and they ignore the low-hanging fruit, which I would argue is the vast majority of the population that would actually just benefit tremendously from recognizing themselves in that moment of redhead and practicing some strategies to move away from it. Even just from, like we said before, about a case of parenting, it's so easy to enter into that. And I have it on the daily, where I see myself entering that red space.
Yes.
And my children aren't doing it out of malice. They're being
no, we all get triggered by that.
Yeah.
But and then it's about how do you practice it? And that needs to be very coherent, because it can get complicated too quickly. So some of those models I talked about, which are really good, pretty quickly it's really complicated stuff. So we've just got some simple things like do your what ifs tool, prepare for it, do your control circles tool, start to work on your own recognition, have some rituals, and there's loads of examples. You can go and listen to all the All Blacks talking about how they used it. And they did pretty well. But just as much, you can go on our Instagram and listen to some young 13, 14-year-old kids, or Adriano, who's up a mountain now trying to, do all the 14 peaks, and she's literally in those moments practicing.
I saw her actually, yeah.
There's loads of cool examples from really ordinary people in some really unusual spaces. And like you said, you like to look out and learn from others. Well, they've all got that common language, and this is how I go from red to blue. It's quite cool.
Yeah. I think getting outside of that siloed thinking has been the biggest thing, the biggest development tool for me. And I think in most sectors, that's going to be a real game changer for people. Dude, I've absolutely loved that. Thank you for your openness and humility and being able to go down these different rabbit holes for me. I'm sure at times you probably heard me talking and thought, where the bloody hell is he going with this crap? So I appreciate you sticking with me, and I appreciate your patience, and I appreciate helping me sort of navigate through some of that fog. If people want to learn a little bit more about this, we are going to put a link into the notes of the podcast. But verbally, is there any way or any direction that you would prefer people to make contact with yourself and or the company? What's the best place to sort of reach out?
Oh, you can just go on the website, and if you want to get accredited, certified to go and teach red to blue in your school or your club or your fire station, come and get it done. It's not costly. And
so this is something that we can train people inside organizations so that they can, it's not something like an endless thing they're going to have to pay for. It's something they can train up and upskill one of their individuals, which obviously, without putting my corporate head on, will tick a lot of their boxes in terms of investing in their own people, that person's personal development, but also the collective benefit they could have by this person coaching different individuals across different stations or sectors. Or
we've got ex-fire chiefs who are retired now, come and they're certified in red to blue. They can go and coach people. We've got ex-firemen who are doing it. And I know this is going to be a bit American, but to any firefighters who are listening, thank you very much for what you do. And
Bede, thank you much, my friend. Take care of yourself. I'll speak to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Peter. Keep in touch.
Firefighters podcast is put together to develop, inspire, and hopefully even motivate those individuals who have chosen to serve our communities and be part of the first responder family. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield. If you have enjoyed today's episode and you want to see the podcast continue, please head over to our Patreon page where you can support the ongoing efforts of the podcast. Please hit that follow, subscribe, or rate button on whatever platform you're listening to. Please support your emergency services responders, and thank you for listening.